As to the Declaration, no, I have ever held it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical. For what country can preserve its liberties if its rulers are not warned from time to time that the people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. What signify a few lives lost in a century or two? The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. And such was the sentiment in Philadelphia that summer of '76, at the meeting there of the Second Continental Congress. And so, following instructions from our legislature, our Virginia delegation moved that the Congress should declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. And so a committee was appointed to draft such a declaration. That committee were John Adams, Dr. Franklin, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Robert Livingston of New York, and myself. When our committee first met, I expressed my opinion to Mr. Adams that he should make the draft. He preferred instead that I should write it. Why? I asked. Reasons enough, quoth he. What can be your reasons? Reason the first, you are a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to appear at the head of this business. Reason second, you can write 10 times better than I can, which is true. Reason third, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular, and you are very much the otherwise. And so it was decided by our committee that I should draft our declaration. That decision being made, I repaired immediately to my lodging, some blocks from the State House where we met, and immediately set to work at my portable writing box. And although the Congress I knew was impatient, it was yet 2 weeks before I was satisfied with what I had written, to show the draft to Mr. Adams and to Dr. Franklin for their emendations. Neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular and previous writing, it was intended to be an expression of the American mind, and to give to that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. All its authority rests in the harmonizing sentiments of the day, whether expressed in conversations or in letters or in printed essays or in the elementary works of public rights, such as one may find in Aristotle or Cicero or Locke or in the writings of Algernon Sidney. For while none believed that we should ever again be united with Great Britain, some argued that they were against adopting such a declaration at this time. Among these, of course, was John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, who ever argued for the cause of moderation. And as Dr. Franklin has observed, we ought to observe moderation in all things, including moderation. On the other side, it was urged that the question was not whether by a declaration of independence we should make ourselves what we were not, but whether we should declare a fact that already existed, that as to the people or Parliament of England, we had always been independent of them. And as to the king, we had been bound to him by allegiance, but that this bond was now dissolved by his assent to the last act of Parliament, in which he had declared us to be out of his protection, and by his levying war on us, a fact which had long proved us to be out of his protection. The declaration being drafted and approved by our committee, I reported it to the House on Friday, the 28th of June, when it was read and ordered to lie on the table for consideration by the other members. While under consideration, there were 2 or 3 unlucky expressions among the document that gave offense to some members, some threatening to quit the Congress altogether because of them. Among these, the clause reprobating the enslaving of inhabitants of Africa was struck out. This was done in complaisance to South Carolina and Georgia, which had never attempted to restrain the importation of their slaves, and who, on the contrary, wished to continue it. Our northern brethren, I believe, also felt a little tender under these censures, for although their people had very few slaves themselves, they had been pretty considerable carriers of them to others. What a stupendous, what an incomprehensible machine is man, who can endure toil, famine, stripes, imprisonment, and death itself in vindication of his own liberty, and the next minute be deaf to all those motives which supported him through his trial, and inflict on his fellow man a bondage, 1 hour of which is fraught with more misery than ages of that which he rose in rebellion to oppose. And although the offending expressions were immediately yielded, these gentlemen continued their depredations on other parts of the document. I was sitting by Dr. Franklin, who observed that I was not insensible to these mutilations. "This is why I have made it a rule," quoth he, "whenever in my power, to avoid becoming the draftsman of papers to be reviewed by a public body." And in truth, in the course of a debate, I never heard Dr. Franklin speak for 10 minutes at a time, nor to any but the main point which was to decide the question. And I believe that if members of deliberative bodies observed this course generally, they would do in 1 day what it takes them a week. If the present Congress errs in too much talking, how can it be otherwise in a body to which the people now send 150 lawyers, whose trade it is to argue everything, yield nothing, and talk by the hour? That 150 lawyers should do business together ought not be expected. But to return to our subject. These debates had taken up the greater part of the 2nd and the 3rd, and also the 4th days of July. And oft times, I must tell you, their outcome was far from certain, for they were long, difficult days, much filled with quarrel and contention, with bitter personal accusation, as well as with compromise. So that finally, on the evening of the 4th, the debates were closed. Our revised declaration was reported by our committee, approved by the House, and signed by every member present, except Mr. Dickinson, who would not give it the sanction of his name. I can scarce believe so many years have now passed since we approved this instrument of freedom. Now remains but a small band of that host of worthies who were joined that day in the bold and doubtful election we were to make between submission and the sword. And it is consolatory, after all these years, that you, our fellow citizens, continue to approve the choice we made that day. May our American independence be to this world what I believe it will be: the signal of arousing men to burst the chains under which monkish ignorance and superstition have persuaded them to bind themselves, and to assume for themselves the blessings and security of self-government. That we have established these rights here gives grounds of hope to people throughout the world. May God bless and preserve our United States of America. I am, most humbly, yours, Thomas Jefferson.